Can I ask for a roll call, please?
Alderman Bob Bauman,
Here.
Mr. Mark Flaherty, Mr. James Cantor,
Here.
Mr. Scott Linsky,
Here.
Mr. Greg Marcus,
Here.
Ms. Aisha Sawa.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. First order of business is, last meeting we had was October, so the discussion and approval of the meeting minutes from October 14th of 2021. Anything to add, or I ask for a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. The meeting minutes are approved. With that, I will move to Steve Marsh and give our 2021 financial report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. Today's update will include a review of the forecasted 2021 income statement as well as the capital expenditure budget summary. We will also review the 12-month projected operational and restricted cash positions. Overall, today's financial news regarding 2021 is positive. But before we go through what I think will probably be our last reviews of 21 activity, a quick comment regarding 2022. You'll notice there are no financial exhibits for the 22 fiscal year in today's packet. At this time, we continue to forecast the budget the board adopted in October. We are, of course, closely monitoring any and all impacts to our business stemming from the latest COVID-19 surge driven by the Omicron variant. At this time, we're happy to report that any negative impact to our business has been very minimal over the past 30 days. Unfortunately, two of our team events had to postpone games in December, one for the Wade and one for the Admirals. However, we expect both games to be rescheduled with the resulting income hitting the 22 financials. As for activity planned in 22, the event calendar remains full, and we've not seen any cancellations or postponements. To the contrary, we've in fact added event activity to the calendar since our budget presentation in October. We will continue to monitor developments and impact to the business and adjust our planning accordingly throughout the upcoming year. A couple of other quick updates before we get into the financial exhibits. Number one, since we last met as a group in October, the district closed on the bond transaction that refinanced the Series 2013 theater debt. Annually, we can expect to save approximately $240,000 a year in debt service payments as a result of this refinancing. Number two, Baker Tilly conducted their preliminary audit field work in December. Kyle, our Director of Finance, and I will be spending the better part of the next 45 days preparing for their primary field work, which is scheduled to occur in March. And as a reminder, Baker Tilly will be presenting their audit report to this committee in May. And number three, we're currently interviewing for an accounting supervisor position and hope to make a hire soon. That position has really been unfilled since January of 2020 due to the pandemic and the associated mitigation measures we undertook as an organization. We elected to not fill that position again until recently. Our hope is that this additional resource will make our accounting processes and the timing around completing such processes much more efficient. So on to the financial statements, and we're going to start with the income statement, which is page 6 of your packet and has column IDs E, F, G, and H at the top. This shows a comparison of the 2021 annual budget, column E, and the 2021 annual forecast, column F. You can see on line 67, column G, that we expect to exceed our budget net income before depreciation by a remarkable $7.6 million. That's more than double what we budgeted to achieve in 2021. While these numbers are preliminary and we may see some movement as we true up year-end accruals for the audit, I don't expect to see a material change in the bottom line results. Aside from the audit presentation in May, this will, like I said before, be the last time we probably review 2021. And I think that's too bad because I think we really have a good story to tell about this past year. If you recall, a year ago at this time in this meeting, Marty and I were already revising down our projections for 2021, largely due to an expected decrease in tax collections during first and second quarter. And frankly, we were uncertain about the event activity that would or would not occur in the upcoming year. At that same time, the vaccine event was just getting underway in our ballroom, and it was impossible to predict the magnitude of the success of that event. And without trying to overstate this, that event may have been as financially important to the district as was the June 2020 bond refinancing deal in terms of how we got through the pandemic as an organization. Providing the district's ballroom for the purpose of administering upwards of 145,000 vaccines provided
Who was the
operational.
actual customer there? Was that FEMA? I mean, who
We-
paid the bill, basically? I'm
We
just curious.
contracted through the city
Okay.
alderman for that, and I believe the city was funded through federal government.
When FEMA took over, from a contractual standpoint, it became easier to keep a contract with the city, and the flows,
I see.
the funds flowed through
Got
that,
it.
although
Okay.
FEMA was underwriting it.
Providing the district's ballroom for the purpose of administering upwards of 145,000 vaccines provided operational cash flow that allowed us to keep the lights on, keep our employees working, and really bought us time for when normal business activity got back underway later that summer. The financial impact of that event ripples through line items 1 through 28 and sustained us really for the first half of 2021. And while those financial successes are incredibly important, it's nothing compared to the immeasurable impact that event had in the community. Not only did the results of that event provide real protection against a terrible disease, it also gave hope to so many in our community where none existed. That event was the embodiment of our BPX credo. As the vaccine clinic was to the first and second quarter of 2021 in terms of financial impact, so was the Beyond Van Gogh event to third and fourth quarter. We could not have hoped for a more successful event. Not only did this bring in meaningful net income, but it also exposed the convention center to the local community in a way that many hadn't seen before. Both the vaccine clinic and the Beyond Van Gogh event produced higher margins for the district than we'd otherwise expect to see for an entertainment or concert event or even a week-long convention.
Excuse me, I'll just bring the gentleman up here. Here they are, right? No.
Patrick Clare, GS, I don't know, oh, it's supposed to be with Tom Nicholson.
I'll be
Yeah.
there.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's all right, good to see you anyway.
All right, good to see you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'll be right there.
The higher margin explains why we see such an uptick in the operating revenues lines 1 through 14, but not a corresponding uptick in operating expenses line 15 to 29. Due to the duration of these two events, the timing of when these two events occurred in the middle of a pandemic, and the nature of these events, and that it did not call for large masses of people to gather at any one time, it really was an incredible set of circumstances that came together and set us up for success. One other highlight of 2021, and it pertains to operating revenues, and specifically line 13, we received a grant just north of $980,000 over the summer from the Small Business Administration as part of the Save Our Venues grant program. Opportunities for outside assistance such as this were few and far between for the district during the pandemic because our unique government entity-like status disqualified us from applying for a lot of these. This grant, along with the grant awarded to us by the DOA at the end of 2020, were very meaningful and an important part of how we shored up operational cash flow throughout the year. Lines 30 through 35 tax revenues, that was a bit of a roller coaster ride in 2021. And that began with the write-down of those numbers that occurred as part of the January 2021 reforecast. However, in second quarter, we began to see a recovery in this category. And as the months went along, we began to chip away in large chunks at the early season deficits to the point now where we're projecting to miss budget by only about 3% in this category. To be clear, we've not yet received the final numbers for November or December business. We continue to project our original January forecast for these months, which we believe is a low-risk, conservative estimate, so we could see some additional positive movement here before we close the books. As you scroll down to lines 42 through 65, you'll notice a lot of positive variation in these expense categories relative to budget. The biggest variance is line 50, Visit Milwaukee. The budget number of $4.6 million was established in October of 20 before we knew about the nosedive tax revenues we take in the fourth quarter of that year. Because visits payment in 21 is based off of revenues collected in 20, the fourth quarter slide caused us to write down this expense early on, and that was a matter we communicated to Visit with extreme haste so they could better plan for their operating year. Other line items worth noting, unemployment compensation line 44 was not nearly as high as we had anticipated, again, due in part to our ability to put people back to work sooner and longer because of the vaccine clinic and the Beyond Van Go event. On the flip side of that, line 59, recruiting expense has increased due to a much tighter labor market and also because of some professional services related to filling some senior level positions within the organization. You can see other puts and takes along the way, mostly to the better, as we really worked hard to manage down on operating expenses in 2021. And that leads us back to line 67 and the punchline of 2021, which was we doubled our net income before depreciation expense during really an unprecedented time in our world, and something that we as an organization, including this board, should be very proud of. On to the next exhibit, the CapEx budget, which is page 9 of your packet. Most of the year, I've included this exhibit in its budget form only. Part of the reason was there wasn't much to report. If you recall,
Can I ask you a question first?
Go ahead, Scott.
So going back to, I'm looking at your tax revenue.
Yes.
And on line 35 on page 5 is 27.2. And then when you're doing your annual forecast on page, that must be on page 6 there, you're at 30.5. Because you're on budget in your actual.
The year-to-date actual, yeah. The year-to-date actual.
Yeah, but then you drop off by 3% in your forecast.
That's right.
Because you drop down, you're break even on, in your B on page 5, but then you drop off by 3% on line 35 on page 6. Is the 27 million, is that just 10 months? I'm just trying to understand why your forecast is a drop in the revenue.
Scott, I'll take a look at that. I mean, conceptually, the reason is the budget for December is much higher than the forecast we're projecting for December. And again, those numbers haven't come in yet from the DOR. We expect to receive both the November tax results next week and the December tax results the week of February 15th. So for now, we've projected conservatively those 2 months.
Is your number for page 5, is that 10 months for tax revenue, or is that 12, 11?
It should be representative of 11, but I'm going to go back and take a look at that after this.
Okay.
Confirm that it's not only October. So let me circle back on that.
Okay, that's fine. And then the Visit Milwaukee issue, so that's where you're projecting you're going to end up too. And Visit Milwaukee is well aware of this, as you stated, right?
That's correct. Yep. Yes.
And Steve, that shouldn't change because that's based upon the 21 actual tax collection.
The Visit Milwaukee expense that we see represented here is a combination of a couple factors. Number one are the 2020 city hotel tax collections, as well as the 2021 county hotel tax collections. So we could see this number move upwards a little bit if the numbers for November and December 21 come in a little bit higher. That's a smaller portion of the payment than the city side of it, but it could move it.
Okay. Thanks for that explanation.
Yeah, and I agree.
Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
I agree that you should be very pleased with your operating income of where that ended up, and you were able to maintain your operating expenses too at a lower level. So that's very good to see. Thank you. That's all the questions I had.
Thank you, Scott.
I wanted to give some color just on just how we're looking at room revenue for next year, and just we're not projecting a big. I mean, we had a lot of stuff that was sort of fell in our lap last year in terms of the Bucks and the Ryder Cup And actually, even having Summerfest move to the fall and the weekends was a very, which was which was very beneficial to the hotel business in a way that it typically isn't. And so, if the Bucks go back to the championship, I guess, well, we can have a countdown. Great, but I just, we aren't projecting to be up this coming year. We're projecting to just sort of hold flat. So, which is a little bit up actually, because there's some stuff in our numbers where we had some grants and stuff, but it's not going to. I don't know there's going to be a huge increase, just due to the fact that we had some real big one-timers last year. So it's good to be conservative. I think your approach is conservative. It seems like.
Great. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, if you just go back to 2019, your citywide room tax was between 23 and 24 million, the combined of the city room tax and the countywide room tax. And your number's going to be close to 18 this year. So we're still behind the curve from 2019. But I mean, it portends well, going to the future, because your budget for 2022 was 31.7, in total for, in total for all of the net tax revenue. So it's coming back. We're not back to the same levels we were, because in 2019 you were at 37 million for all of your net tax revenue, versus the 31.7. But you're back better than originally you were. So
yeah, I think we're seeing incremental progress from 2020. Our budget for 22, we approached again conservatively, not expecting to see a major increase over what we were forecasting for 21 at the time. So I think the fact that we budgeted almost flat for 22, where we expect to end 21, I think there's some potential upside if we can get on the other side of this Omicron here in the next month or two. I think there's potential to see improvement.
And you may recall that when we were working on getting approvals to move forward with the expansion and then financing later in the year, we were looking at HBS's numbers for their tax projections, and they were projecting a 2019 recovery, late 23 into 24. So we're following along what we had anticipated and the third party had said we could expect.
That's right. Okay, going back to page 9, which is the CapEx budget. As I mentioned before, we've been presenting this report to the committee and the board at budget for most of the year. Part of our COVID mitigation plan was to defer CapEx projects into third and fourth quarter as much as we could. This was going to allow us to react smartly to any changes in our business environment and also address those critical infrastructure issues that were unforeseen when we put together the original budget in October of 20. Scrolling down to line 35 of that page, you can see we expect to come in slightly under budget by about 174K. You also notice that there were some projects we expected to take on that didn't occur, and some projects we took on that weren't previously planned for, and those are listed on page 10 as part of our contingency summary. The total budget number of 1.587 million is not what we would expect to see in terms of spend in a normal operating year. We were intentional in keeping this number low in 21 as we worked our way out of the doldrums of the pandemic, so to speak. In future years, our expectation is that we'll get back to an operating model where we're investing upwards of 3 million per year in capital infrastructure. One final note on CapEx: while we're forecasting these items in this management report as occurring in 2021, it's very possible some of these projects don't hit our books until 22, as we deal with long lead times pertaining to product and materials as a result of the supply chain crunch. So it may just be a timing issue in terms of when cash goes out the door and some of these items actually get put onto our books. Pages 11 and 12 represent our cash projections for the next 12 months. Page 11 is our unrestricted position. The numbers you see here represent really 22 budget numbers, but for the starting balance in January. That's actually higher relative to budget based on better performance in 21, which means we're expecting to end 22 with a higher cash balance than budget. Certainly good news there. And page 12 represents the restricted position. Again, you've heard me say this many times over the past 12 months, but management is very pleased with the balance of this account and its projection to continue to grow over the next 12 months. Mr. Chairman, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, the news regarding 21 is positive. We were faced with very challenging circumstances at the onset of the year, and through careful planning, hard work, and a little bit of luck, we came out the other side stronger and well positioned to seize opportunities for growth in 2022. That is my report, Mr. Chairman.
Great, Steve. Thank you. Anybody have any other questions or comments? I think we're looking at 2022 is probably the right way. And Greg, that's great insight from how you guys are looking at it as well to kind of help that. And we're planning according to those projections we had at the onset of the expansion. So with that, any other questions for Steve? Great. And I'll turn it over to Marty for the CEO report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to start by expressing my appreciation to you for being able to join us today. I know you're under the weather. You don't sound the same chipper, high energy Jim Cantor that we're accustomed to. So we're sorry you're feeling ill, but very appreciative that you were able to join us this morning. Thank you for that, sir. As Steve has indicated, I'm not going to belabor it too much, but 21 turned out to be far better than we had anticipated. As Steve has already stated, but I have it in my notes, so I have to at least cover a little bit more. Can't understate the importance that both the vaccine and BVG had on our financial success for 21. But I also want to raise that part of a big factor as to why those events could even have been contemplated, yet alone secured, is the successes we realized in 2020. I think hosting, albeit a different DNC than was hoped for, hosting the DNC in August of 20, hosting the maybe controversial to some, but the presidential recount vote in November are two examples of our facility operating in a pandemic environment when most other facilities were completely shut down. So for us to be able to have that business, be able to develop and then implement safety plans that addressed not just the virus airborne, which was thought to be the case on surfaces, but also employees with masking, and this is all pre-vaccination. The lessons learned in 20 and the things we put in place really helped us build confidence in people to do business with us and here in Milwaukee, as well as then come to our facility throughout the year. So yes, those events were great, but let's not forget what came before them that enabled us to get there and the trust of the public to have that. As Steve indicated, and I'm going to knock the table when I say this, I feel like this is March 6th of 2019 redux. At this point, we have not had any cancellations or reductions in events for 22 because of the latest variant. As Steve indicated, we are adding events for 22. So that's very encouraging. We will certainly keep the board apprised of things should they change. We are watching very closely the latest activities over the past week or so with the city possibly enforcing a mask mandate that could certainly affect the city. So more to come on that, but we will keep you apprised as it affects our business. We've already confirmed with firm on sale or contracted 13 public events in the Miller High Life Theater, 17 private events as well. We've got the Panther Arena with our complement of sports teams, other than the 2 single game cancellations that Steve referenced. And they weren't because of our team. It was the visiting team couldn't field the team for the soccer team and the hockey game because they couldn't field enough players to their roster because of COVID. The Admirals are back. We have UW and Panther with 9 more games this year. The waiver in our building for 9 more games, and 4 other publicly ticketed events and private events in the theaters. The arena. So we're very optimistic and have contracted events in all of our properties to support what we have in the 22 budget that hopefully we will be able to surpass. Something that we are getting immersed in is working with Visit Milwaukee and the various committees that are involved in pursuing Republican National Convention for 2024. We'll see where that goes, but I think over the next couple of weeks, there will be activities that we're asked to participate in to demonstrate our city's ability to support their event, very similar to what we went through with the DNC a number of years ago. There still is an outstanding grant that we hope to be considered for through the state using federal money, and that's for infrastructure improvements to convention centers and other public tourist destinations. That was submitted back in October, and we've been told we were fearful, having not heard anything, that could mean that we were under the impression that money's had to be allocated by December 21. We've been since told that that's not the case and could be allocated anytime between now and the next 6 to 8 months. So just keep you apprised. We have a request in for $3.5 million for 3 different projects for the existing convention center. We'd like to see some assistance on so we can implement them. Keep you apprised of that. On the expansion side, Mike Abrams from CA Icon will be at the board meeting next week to give us an update on where we are with the project from an execution standpoint. We'll also go through the latest inclusion report, and then subsequent to you hearing about it on Friday, we will distribute a copy to you and make it available on our website to anyone who cares to see it. We are, of most note, and I share this mostly for Alderman Bauman and Greg Marcus is concerned, although I think it affects everyone on the call. We are more than halfway through the pile driving of the foundation. That is scheduled to be done by the second-ish week of February, and we are on track to achieve that deadline. So any disruptions that people are feeling because of sound and vibration have been minimalized. We have great sensors around our property and off our property. And I think there's been one mild event where there was some over the certain level, but nothing of any concern. We've gotten, at least this office has gotten no complaints or concerns. A number of people were asking, when is that going to stop? But an appreciation that the noise is a necessary evil for progress in the city. So that part is almost done and going well. We're happy about the timing of that.
I'm assuming there's no surprises in the depth of pilings. I know that's always an issue, and like, oh, well, we'll wait and tell you once we're done.
Yeah, you know what? Thank you for asking. No, there have been no surprises. The only thing that was a bit of an is they were going in one location and they hit some rock that they hadn't expected, but were able to work through it. So, but nothing as far as piles, losing them, disappearing because of bad soil. It's been very routine, if there is such a thing in the construction world, and driving piles. So all good. Something that has picked up in the past several weeks, and we were on track with that. We had the plan was after the October 28th groundbreaking to really hit the world with an opportunity to get involved with us for naming rights for the property. A number of preliminary meetings have already occurred, which are leading to second meetings in a number of cases, which is very encouraging. And we aren't even off of our first list of top hits. So I don't expect anything to materialize quickly, but I'm very encouraged that not only are we getting initial meetings, but initial meetings are leading to second meetings with more substantive discussion. So that's, no one's closed the door on our faces here, which is a terrific place to be in. And as Steve mentioned, with the variance that we saw in 21 with recruiting, we continue to be focused on recruiting part-time labor. That's certainly an area that most organizations are struggling with, but we continue that effort. We have a number of budgeted full-time administrative positions that we have started recruiting for, but as each position is looked at, we certainly are keeping tabs on where we are financially and what the operational need is for filling any full-time position just because of the uncertainty that we still want to make sure we're cognizant of. And something that I will share next week with the full board, but I'll share with this group that I feel akin to, is next Saturday, I will celebrate my 4th year anniversary here. And I could not be happier, and it couldn't have gone by any quicker. So thank you for that. And on that note, Mr. Chairman, I have concluded my CEO report and open it up for any questions any of you may have for me.
You look younger than you did 4 years ago. See?
That must be because of the medication you're on, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank you. Anybody have any questions for Marty? All right. The next order of business is the Board of Directors meeting. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to see it in the documents, but basically very similar to the flow here. We'll go through a approval of meeting minutes, financial report from Steve, CEO report from Marty. We'll go through the personnel discussion as it is end of the year time, and that is something we will talk about in a closed session. We will go through that with the governance committee and come with a recommendation here shortly. A board composition update. Kirk, you'll be able to provide us with that. We have talked a little bit about some of the committees and some of the new members and some of the movings and comings and goings there. So we'll go through that. Mike will be here for an expansion update and then meeting dates and additional items. Is there anything else anyone would like to see on that board meeting for next Friday?
Is there any action items that will take place at there? I mean, are we going to be getting some resolutions during the week that we're going to have to review and then approve at that meeting?
Yes, Scott, there will be an action on the personnel side. There's nothing right now because we're going to go through those that discussion with the governance committee in the next meeting, and we will send out some information kind of where we're going in terms of that before that meeting on Friday. But most of it will be as part of a discussion as well. Other questions? All right. With that said, Michael, I think committee future dates, those are all locked and loaded. Nothing's changed there, right?
Correct. The next
And then
meetings are March 10th.
the next committee meetings are March 10th. Thank you. And then last is any other committee discussion items before we adjourn. All right. With that, I missed the food over there today, that's for sure. But I thank you for your time and effort. Great report, Steve and Marty, overall on the financial stuff. And let's keep it going for 2022. With that, I will look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll
Seconded.
Great. All in favor of adjourn? Say aye.
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 All right. Have a great week, everybody, and weekend, and we will see you on Friday.
Thanks.
Bye.
Feel better.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
make sure. Michael, can we do a roll call, please?
Mr. Joel Brennan,
Present.
Mr. Grady Crosby,
Here.
Senator Latanya Johnson,
Here.
Mr. James Cantor.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. First order of business, believe it or not, our last governance meeting was on the 14th of October. So any discussion on the meeting minutes? If not, I would look for a motion to approve.
I'll move approval.
Do we have a second?
Johnson.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. The meeting minutes are approved from October governance. Next, Steve Marsh to give our financial report for 2021 and then how things are starting to look for 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. Today's update is going to include a review of the forecasted 21 income statement as well as the capital expenditure budget summary. We'll also review the 12-month projected operational and restricted cash positions. Overall, today's financial news regarding 2021 is positive. But before we go through what I think will probably be our last review of 21 activity, a quick comment regarding 2022. You'll notice there are no financial exhibits for the 22 fiscal year in your packet today. At this time, we continue to forecast the budget the board adopted in October. We are, of course, closely monitoring any and all impacts to our business stemming from the latest COVID-19 surge driven by the Omicron variant. At this time, we're happy to report that any negative impact to our business has been very minimal for the past 30 days. Unfortunately, two of our team events had to postpone games in December, one for the Wave and one for the Admirals. However, we expect both games to be rescheduled with the resulting income hitting the 22 financials. As for activity planned in 22, the event calendar remains full, and we've not seen any cancellations or postponements. In fact, to the contrary, we've added event activity to the calendar since our budget presentation in October. We will continue to monitor developments and impact to the business and adjust our planning accordingly throughout the upcoming year. A couple other quick updates here. Number one, since we last met as a group in October, the district closed on the bond transaction that refinanced the Series 2013 A theater debt. Annually, we can expect to save approximately $240,000 per year in debt service payments as a result of that refinancing. And number two, Baker Tilly conducted their preliminary audit fieldwork in December. Kyle, the Director of Finance, and I will be spending the better part of the next 45 days preparing for their primary fieldwork, which is scheduled to occur in March. As a reminder, Baker Tilly will be presenting their audit report to the full board in May. So, onto the financial statements. We'll start with the income statement, which is page 7 of your packet and has column IDs E, F, G, and H at the top. And this shows a comparison of the 21 budget, which is column E, to the 21 annual forecast, column F. You can see on line 67, column G, we expect to exceed our budget net income before depreciation by a quite remarkable $7.6 million, more than double what we had budgeted to achieve. And while these numbers are preliminary and we may see some movement as we true up year-end accruals for the audit, I don't expect to see a material change in the bottom line results. Aside from the audit presentation in May, and as I said before, this is probably the last time we'll talk about 21, which is too bad because I think we really do have a good story to tell about this past year. If you recall, a year ago at this time, in this meeting, in the board meeting in January of 21, Marty and I were already revising down our projections for 21, largely due to an expected decrease in tax collections during first and second quarter. And frankly, we were uncertain about the event activity that would or would not occur in the upcoming year. At that same time, the vaccine event was just getting underway in our ballroom, and it was impossible to predict, I think at that time, the magnitude of the success of that event. And without trying to overstate this, that event may have been as financially important to the district as was the June 2020 bond refinancing deal in terms of how we got through the pandemic as an organization. Providing the district's ballroom for the purpose of administering upwards of 145,000 vaccines provided operational cash flow that allowed us to keep the lights on, keep our employees working, and really bought us time for when normal business activity got back underway later that summer. The financial impact of that event ripples through line items 1 through 28 of the income statement and really sustained us for the first half of 2021. And while those financial successes are incredibly important, it's nothing compared to the measurable impact that event had in the community. Not only did the results of that event provide real protection against a terrible disease, it also gave hope to so many in our community where hope didn't exist.
Hey, Steve?
Yeah.
If I may, I just would volunteer to you that my 2 teenage children were amongst those who were able to avail themselves of that here on the very first day that they were available and, you know, got their second shot. And it becomes much more important, again, I know we do a lot of things that try to make these meetings light, but in the middle of December, I got COVID despite having been vaccinated and boosted, my wife and my daughter. And none of us, I mean, the good news about all that and the reason why it's so important, the work that you have done, we spend time in the basement, not in a hospital, not, you know, taking up resources that I think all of us have seen and jeopardizing the recovery from this. So I would just echo that what you guys did here and stepping up for the community had a big impact in the community and continues to play a role and a rippling effect in that. So I want to express my personal appreciation for that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We're just happy to be a part of it. You've heard us hammer home BPX. Those are Sarah Mayo's favorite 3 letters. That event, I think, embodied BPX more than anything else we've done here, at least in my tenure. As the vaccine clinic was to the first and second quarter of 21 in terms of financial impact, so was the Beyond Van Gogh event to the third and fourth quarter. We could not have hoped for a more successful event. Not only did this bring in meaningful net income, but it also exposed the convention center to the local community in a way that many hadn't seen before. Both the vaccine clinic and the Beyond Van Gogh event produced higher margins for the district than we'd otherwise expect to see for an entertainment or concert event or even a week-long convention. That somewhat explains why we see such an uptick in operating revenues, lines 1 through 14, but not a corresponding uptick in operating expenses, lines 15 through 29. Due to the duration of these 2 events, the timing of when these 2 events occurred, which was in the middle of a pandemic, and the nature of these 2 events in that it did not call for large masses of people to gather at any one time. It really was an incredible set of circumstances that came together and set us up for success in 21. One other highlight of 21 as it pertains to operating revenues, and specifically line 13, we received a grant just north of $980,000 from the Small Business Administration as part of the Save Our Venues grant program. Opportunities for outside assistance such as this were few and far between for the district during the pandemic because of our unique government entity-like status. This grant, along with the grant awarded to us by the DOA at the end of 2020, were very meaningful and an important part of how we shored up operational cash flow throughout the year. Lines 30 through 35 tax revenues, that was a bit of a roller coaster ride in 21, beginning with the write-down of those numbers that occurred as part of the January 21 reforecast. However, in the second quarter, we began to see a recovery in this category, and as the months went along, we began to chip away at that deficit in large chunks, to the point now we're projecting to miss budget by only 3%. To be clear, we've not yet received final numbers for November, which we expect to receive next week, or December business, which we hope to have by the middle of February. We do continue to project our original forecast for those 2 months, which we believe is a low-risk, conservative estimate, so we could expect to see some positive movement here before we close the books. As you scroll down to lines 42 through 65, you'll notice a lot of positive variation in the expense categories relative to budget. The biggest variance is line 50, Visit Milwaukee. The budget number of $4.6 million was established in October of 2020, really before we knew about the nosedive in tax revenues that would take place in the fourth quarter of that year. Because Visit's payment in 21 is based off of revenues collected in 20, the fourth quarter slide caused us to have to write down that expense early on, a matter we communicated to Visit with extreme haste so that they could better plan for their operating year. Other line items worth noting, unemployment compensation, line 44, was not nearly as high as we had anticipated, again, due in part to our ability to put people back to work sooner and longer because of the vaccine clinic and the Beyond Van Gogh event. On the flip side of that, line 59, You'll notice recruiting expenses increased due to a much tighter labor market and also because of professional services related to filling some senior level positions within the organization. You can see other puts and takes along the way, mostly to the better, as we worked hard to manage down non-operating expenses in 2021. And that leads us back to line 67, really the punchline at 21, which was we doubled our net income before depreciation expense during an unprecedented time in the world, something that we as an organization, including this board, should be very proud of. On to the next exhibit, the CapEx budget, which is page 10 of your packet.
Steve, before you move forward, are there any questions from any of the board, any of the committee members, what Steve's already covered?
Just one point, I think that was brought up, and maybe it's more pertinent to the 2022 conversation that Greg Marcus did bring up in the Finance and Personnel Committee meeting, and the way they're looking at things like tax revenue. What we should be looking at, and I think Steve and Marty have looked at it, is probably flat to slightly down this year. That he did indicate there were a number of one-time events that the way they look at it, whether it was Ryder Cup or the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, if they make it again to the championship series, that would be obviously beneficial. And then he even said Summerfest. So I think the team has done a nice job managing through it. And I think looking at 2022 conservatively, as we'll look at next, is probably the best approach. And I don't want to get lulled into a false sense of security that, oh man, we're on this great recovery. I don't think anybody necessarily feels that, even though the numbers may indicate that we're in that spot. And I think, Marty, you said it, we're still following what the survey that was done took into account as far as tax revenues into more of a recovery in 2023 or 2024 as we expand. So I just want to make sure we're all on that same page.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. We do use that HVS study as sort of a guidepost when we're thinking about the upcoming year and even years beyond that. And it's something I failed to mention in finance. As part of our budget process for tax revenues in 22, we did reach out to Greg's Vice President of Finance, and we're comparing notes with them on what they were projecting in terms of forecast analysis. So I think what we projected for 22 is probably pretty close to Greg's thinking around this matter. And I'm hopeful it is a conservative projection, and there's room for upside there. But we're not banking on it, Jim. I wake up every morning waiting to be punched in the face by some bad news. So I think we're in a pretty good position operationally going forward.
I know you do, Steve. That's your job. Thank you for doing that.
I am showing such tremendous
Right, same, I know.
for the record.
On to the next exhibit, the CapEx budget, which is page 10 of the packet. Most of the year, I've included this exhibit in budget form only. Part of the reason was that there wasn't much to report. If you recall, part of our COVID mitigation plan was to defer CapEx projects into third and fourth quarters so that we could react more smartly to any changes in our business environment and also address those critical infrastructure issues that were unforeseen when we put together the original budget in October of 20. Scrolling down to line 35 of that exhibit, you can see we expect to come in slightly under budget by about $174,000. You'll also notice that there were some projects that we expected to take on that we didn't, and some projects that we took on that weren't previously planned for, and those are listed on page 11 as part of our contingency summary. The total budget number of $1.5 billion is not what we'd expect to see in terms of spend in a normal operating year. We were intentional in keeping this number low in 21 as we worked our way out of the doldrums of the pandemic. In future years, our expectation is that we get back to an operating model where we're spending upwards of $3 million per year on capital infrastructure. And one final note on CapEx, while we're forecasting these items to be a part of 21 in this management report, it's very possible some of these projects don't hit our books until 2022 as we deal with long lead times pertaining to product and materials as a result of the supply chain crunch. Pages 12 and 13 represent our cash projections for the next 12 months. Page 12, unrestricted cash position. The numbers you see here represent the 22 budget numbers, but for the starting balance in January. That's actually higher than budget based on better performance in 21, which means we're expecting to end 22 with a higher cash balance in budget. That's certainly good news. Page 12 represents the restricted position. Again, this is our rainy day fund for debt service payments. Again, you've heard me say this many times over the past 12 months, but management is very pleased with the balance of this account and its projection to continue to grow over the next year. Mr. Chairman, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, the news regarding 21 is very positive. We were faced with very challenging circumstances at the onset of the year, and through careful planning, hard work, and a little bit of luck, we came out stronger, and I think we're well positioned to seize opportunities for growth in 2022. That is my report today, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well done, Steve. Does anybody have any questions for Steve on the financials, either 2021 or as we look at 2022? Okay, great. Next up, Marty, for our CEO report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment before I get started on the CapEx budget that Steve just walked you through. I want to make sure that the committee is assured that even though we didn't spend the full $1.5 million, that we have not neglected anything that from a facility standpoint, operational standpoint, could cause us to get into a situation where we're not adhering to the appropriate maintenance projects, and we're not putting anything off that puts the organization at all at risk. So just want to, I'm sure you all know that, but I want to underscore that the fact that we haven't spent the money doesn't mean it is not affected by the fact that we're trying to neglect things, or that we're neglecting things that need to be addressed.
Hey, Marty, just a quick question, a little bit related to the capital, but just the operations of the building in the, still during COVID and post-COVID, anything changing, anything that you see or lessons we've learned in the way that we've done it that will have longer term impact as we kind of get back to a norm? And does that have any impact in the way that you guys are looking at how you're spending any of the capital or even operational dollars?
It was over a year ago, and I'm going to, in response to the question, I had planned on raising a comment about the DNC in an unrelated matter. As it relates to operating the buildings in reaction to what we've learned from COVID, if that's your question, and from a cost standpoint, we were forced and blessed to have to react to hosting events at the height of COVID. The blessing for us in many ways was that, albeit a different event than we had hoped, hosting the DNC in August really was a benchmark event for us to make sure we were integrating best practices as we knew them of that day and were writing them to host any number of people in our buildings. That involved some purchase of additional hand sanitizing. We still have an inventory of the original surgical masks that we had ordered, getting the Clorox 360 spray, and a lot of things that we were learning about 2.5 years ago. We made those commitments 2 years ago, and then through the help of state money a year ago, we were able to get some reimbursement for the $398,000 that we had spent. So there's nothing ongoing that has come up unexpected. It's really just making sure we're ahead of the game for ordering supplies, so that because of supply chain, we're not out of disinfectants. We've looked at a lot of options of things we could do. One of the things that was a very hot item to talk about, and people were spending stupid money on the UV lights in HVAC systems and putting UV lights by the railings on escalators. You could have spent tens of millions of dollars knee-jerk reactioning on expenses to this is the latest and greatest. And A, we don't have the resources to spend that kind of money knee-jerk. And secondly, after further investigation, it may or may not be effective. So we've been very deliberate in making sure that we are monitoring what others are doing. We are in touch with our brethren at other facilities. And certainly as we are developing further and finalizing the design for the expansion, making sure we're integrating all best practices for surfaces and hand sanitizing and reducing touch points so that there's going to be something after COVID, and we're doing everything we can think of to make sure that we're minimizing our exposure in the future.
Great.
Does that answer the question? Thank you. As far as the CEO report, although Steve was quick to say, this may be the last time we're going to talk about 21, I'm going to talk about 2021 a little bit longer. It was an extraordinary year for us, notwithstanding the financials, just how we as an organization continued to persevere under very struggling times. Most of our staff for 2021 did return to the office. We did see an uptick in events, and what I can't underscore enough and highlight enough is the importance that the vaccination clinic had on us and the BVG had on us on many aspects. We were able to bring people back to work. We were able to generate revenue. We were able to get confidence in the public to come to our facility. But that is just the next step of what we need to appreciate going back to 2020, and the fact that we were able to host an abbreviated DNC. The fact that while controversial, we did host the election recounts at the end of November. Those events in 20 helped us prepare for and execute successfully in their own right, but then build confidence in others that we could host the vaccination clinic. And I truly believe that hosting the recount set us up and the health department up and others up to realize we were an available venue, but we're also the venue that they could come to and feel confident that we could execute this and support the public and the needs of the event people. So in many ways, the success of 21 was built upon because of the things that we did back in 2020. I'm knocking wood for those of you who couldn't see it directly. As I said, in March 6th of 2019, this virus thing hasn't cost us any events, and then the week following it did. At this point in time, as Steve has already indicated, we have not lost any events for 2022. And in fact, are seeing continued interest in booking entertainment events, meetings, conventions, and private events for this year. So we are cautiously optimistic that we will be able to achieve the 22 numbers, so long as something unforeseen to the negative doesn't happen. We're in a good place as far as bookings of private and public events for both Miller High Life Theater, Panther Arena, as well as the Convention Center. We're working very closely with Visit Milwaukee over the next several weeks. We will participate in some fashion in discussions they're having with the Republican National Convention Organizing Committee to continue to pursue their consideration of Milwaukee as a destination to host the 2024 event. There is an outstanding grant that we're awaiting word from, and we're hoping that Joel was going to bring. He was going to be like who knows? Who's the comedian Howie Mandel? You know, it was Deal or No Deal. I was hoping he was going to bring a briefcase in there with, here's your $3.5 million grant fulfillment that you put in.
I thought it was going to be a big check.
Big check too. That would have taken that. But we still have that grant out there. One of the things that we were concerned about was that money had to be allocated by the end of 21. We've been told it doesn't have to be allocated, and it's still available. So while there's no assurance we're going to see anything, there's still optimism that we may. So that's still out there. It's something that we'd like to get to allow us to move over with 3 projects specifically for the existing facility. At next week's board meeting, it's much more difficult talking about what we'd like to get from the DOE with you sitting next to me than it is when you're like on the phone, or, you know. So
I can say yes or no here, or I can say yes or no on the phone.
It's easier afar.
And I just, for the sake of that, I just want you to know, one, there will be grant announcements. So my official last day is tomorrow. There will be grant announcements in the next few weeks regarding all of those things. On specifically the program you talked about with the tourism capital,
yeah.
And all of these programs, they are scored by civil servants, not political appointees. You know, we've had the ability to kind of look over things and make sure that there's regional diversity and we're meeting needs across the state. On specifically, I'm just going to give you a sense because I saw this in the last days. The the tourism capital grant program was allocated at $10 million. There were $240 million of requests. And so I would just make sure everybody tempers your expectations about that, because having $250 million for a $10 million program shows you, one, what all the need is everywhere, but also some of the limitations of trying to maximize these federal funds.
Understood. When we saw the initial offering, we were very encouraged. And then we saw the amount that was allocated, and it seemed significantly insufficient for what we anticipated.
And I hope that part of what this demonstrates to people in the legislature, and certainly is to the people in the executive branch, is that there still is a need for the state to look at this. We have these federal resources, and there's limitations on those. The state is in a very good in a better position fiscally than we have been in a long time. There could be potential opportunities in a future capital budget or other ways to address some of these things, or to think creatively about this. So none of it, even for those who don't get funded by this, because there will be a whole host of people who will go away somewhat disappointed based on the limitations of dollars. There are hopefully so this sets the table for what could potentially happen down the road.
Thank you for trying to manage our expectations.
I'd have the same conversation with the 200 others who apply for it as well.
I believe that.
Do it in person with you.
I appreciate that, Joe. Thank you. Mike Abrams, next week at the board meeting, will be sharing with the board an update on where we are with the project, the expansion project, as far as percentage of completion, contracts awarded, and an update on we'll present the quarterly inclusion report so the group can be aware of that. After the board meeting, it will be distributed electronically to each of you, as well as put on our website, so that anyone who wants to access the inclusion report will be able to see it just right after the board meeting next week. Let's see a couple of things here. You're aware that we had the groundbreaking on October 28th. Part of our strategy was shortly thereafter, but before the holidays hit, was to reach out to a number of organizations, making them aware that we had this project. It was for real. The ground actually had been broken, and then we were going to be soliciting interest for a naming rights sponsor. A number of preliminary and introductory meetings have been had, which have already resulted in at least 3 second appointments, 2 of which, one is today, one is tomorrow, one was last week. And it's just the beginning of the process. So we're encouraged that there are individuals and entities that see a value to the expansion, to being in downtown Milwaukee, and more to come on that. But we are a long ways from having something confirmed. But the sooner we get it, the better it is for the client, because they can be involved in the project while we're still in development, and sheets and drawings on the page, as opposed to concrete poured and walls up. So all very encouraging. Steve mentioned that we're up a little bit in the recruiting line for 21. We continue to have openings for part-time positions, so we're looking to backfill event services, changeover, housekeeping staff, as all organizations are doing. We have a number of full-time open positions and new positions that we had identified for the 22 budget, and on a case-by-case basis based upon operational needs and Steve and my comfort with our ability to support adds to staff. We're looking at adding to staff, but on an as-needed, as budget can afford basis, and we can do so through 2022. And then the last thing I have is in next week's board meeting, I'm kind of asked that we go into closed session. It's already on the agenda, but we've been working on a business opportunity for the district that I'm not prepared to go into today, but I'm going to want to share with the board next week, as far as an opportunity for us that requires me to come to the board and talk to the board and get input. And so I just want to make you aware that it could all be, has the potential to be terrific for our organization from an opportunity standpoint, and something more to come next week to the full board for your just review. And I have nothing else, Mr. Chairman, unless there are any questions specifically for me.
Just one quick question. I know there's other items on the agenda, but this discussion, I saw Alderman Bauman outside earlier, the discussion of a new venue, proximate to the Summerfest grounds. I know there are other venues in the community that have, started to organize around that in opposition to potentially to that. Any thoughts about what the potential impact could be at the theater or elsewhere about that? And have you been engaged in any of those conversations with any of the stakeholders around that?
We have not, shortly after that it was announced that Live Nation was looking to do something on Summerfest, I learned of it by reading the Business Journal. I did not have a heads up that was going to be announced. And I was quoted that day or the next day, indicating that anything that brings people downtown Milwaukee is a good thing, and I do believe that. However, at such time as we have a better feeling on where that's going, I am concerned that another venue of similar size of the Miller High Life Theater, I don't know that it's necessary, but if it were determined to be moved forward with, I don't see how that doesn't compete with that facility, and therefore potentially have a negative financial impact on us because of the usage of the Miller High Life Theater. We do business with Live Nation, we do business with Frank Productions. I wish them well. I don't know that the market really needs another venue of either 800 seat or 4,000 seat. Any other questions for me? Grady, Latanya? Mr. Chairman, that concludes the CEO report for one last thing, I do apologize, yes. I will say this next Friday to the full board, but just to give you a precursor, next Saturday, I will be celebrating my 4th year anniversary as part of the Wisconsin Center District team, and it has gone by far faster than I could ever have imagined, and has been far more rewarding than I had anticipated. So thank you for not only your past support, but your continued support.
How many years is that in dog years, though, Marty? It's been
it's been 4 years, but I've aged 28. But it's all good.
Good. Well, thank you for that. We're proud to have you leading us up. So thank you for the report, the updates, and obviously more details on some other things like the expansion and whatnot at the next board meeting. With that said, the board composition update, I'll turn it over to Kirk. I think we've had a number of pieces of movement, namely one of the gentlemen sitting at the table today moving into a different role. And then we have some opportunities to still add to some of our committees. I think governance is one of them. So Kirk, I'll turn that over to you.
Sure. So recently there have been some changes to individuals holding certain local and state offices, and we've gotten some questions. So we thought it appropriate to just kind of run through how these changes affect or don't affect this board. So when you think about the board members, it's useful to think about them in 2 groups. So you've got appointed individuals, and then you have individuals who hold a role based on their position that they hold. And so I kind of want to take them as 2 different groups. So with the appointed individuals, we have individuals who are appointed by virtue of satisfying certain requirements, and they're appointed to 3-year terms so long as they continue to satisfy those requirements. You should think of these generally as our private sector individuals. However, it's not just the private sector individuals. This also applies to the appointments from the Common Council president. To that end, when Mr. Barrett resigned to become the ambassador of Luxembourg, it actually has no effect on Mr. Crosby or Ms. Severe's appointment. And they continue to serve in that role at the end of their term. Whoever is mayor at that point will have the option to either reappoint or to appoint new individuals. Similarly, Alderman Johnson's assumption of the acting mayor role has no effect on his appointments to the Common Council, from the Common Council to this board. That role is actually public employees who reside in Milwaukee, and so it includes actually Alderman Johnson. His role is not affected by that shift at all either. The other group is those who hold the role based on the position that they hold. In this other category, the statutes direct that some of those positions can actually designate responsibility to another individual. The primary examples of these are, we got the legislature. So what the statutes provide is that the board member seats are held by the Speaker of the Assembly, the Minority Leader of the Assembly, the Majority Leader of the Senate, and the Minority Leader of the Senate. However, any of those individuals can, and they have, designated that somebody else from the chamber hold the role in their stead. And those individuals hold those roles until the individual who's in the position no longer holds the position. And so we had a change at the minority leader level in the assembly when when Representative Hintz announced that he was stepping down as the minority leader. And my understanding at this point is that Minority Leader Neubauer has actually already indicated that she's going to maintain Representative Haywood's status on this board. And so there will be no change there. The other spot where you see it is at the Secretary of Administration, and you're right, it is less awkward when he's not in the room. So from the Secretary's perspective, the Secretary of Administration has a seat on this House, but the Secretary on this board, but the Secretary of Administration can designate that another individual hold it. And unlike the legislative examples, actually the Secretary of Administration does not have that same limitation that it be a member of the office or a member of the government, really. So in this instance, Secretary Blumenfeld could actually appoint former Secretary Brennan, I guess we'll refer to you like that now, as the person to whom the seat is designated, for so long as Secretary Blumenfeld holds the role. And so all of that happened. Secretary Blumenfeld obviously has not assumed the role yet because your last day is tomorrow. And so we don't know where that one's going yet. The real message, though, is know that as a leadership group, Jim and Marty and the senior leadership team and legal counsel are on it, and we're watching it when these types of things occur.
The only thing that you didn't add, and I just want to, so I'll ask it.
Yeah.
When you were talking about using Mayor Barrett as an example, and leaving in his appointments, I'm going to pick on Grady because he's on mine. Grady stays in that position even though Mayor Barrett's no longer appointed. But Grady still, this is a question, although it sounds like a statement, that there is a condition, though, that Grady still must maintain his City of Milwaukee residency. Is that correct?
He must be a resident of the city of Milwaukee, and he must be a member of the private sector. So, Grady, if you were to join the mayor's office, for example, then you would cease to satisfy one of those two requirements. And we've had that. You might all remember Attorney Lopez was an early appointment when she moved from the city, I think, to Ozaki County. She moved out of the city.
Yeah.
And so at that point, she ceased to satisfy that role, and so the mayor had to appoint somebody else.
That was in 2018. He appointed Raquel at her place.
Right.
That
Which
did
also
the same
didn't
thing.
work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
No,
Kirk.
I expect that before next week, we will be able to figure out what's happening with the seat at DOA. Kathy has indicated that she's open to appointing me. I'd like to continue to serve. I think I'd still have a good pulse on what's going on here. It's up to her and the governor. Even if she appoints me to serve this role, she may come to the initial meeting just so that she can be introduced to everybody and get an idea of what goes on here. But we're still working out those details.
So based upon that, we were going to have a burning ceremony of your nameplate on Monday. We should.
You can do it. Well, I'm not sure it would be appropriate still to have that seal. Maybe,
No,
I don't know.
because you'd be the appointee of the seal. So we'll hold off on it. We'll hold off. We hope to see you continue at this table. We do. We enjoy your participation.
Kirk, one thing, that was a lot. Thank you. That's a lot to go through and a lot to keep track of. Is there a way, that we have the roster of who we have on the board, who they're appointed by, and then where they are in their term? I think maybe, Michael, you have sent that out in the past. I'm not sure if I still have it or not, but that might be helpful, just that summary of what you did with, Joe Brennan, DOA or appointee, and then what year they are and how many more years they can be on the board? Would that be helpful to people?
Yeah, I have that.
Okay.
We'll get that out, Jim.
Yeah, I think that might just be a good summary of what you went through, Kirk.
Yep.
And as far as committees go, do we still have an open spot on governance? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Well, Jim, we have an open position currently, and then depending
Right.
on what happens with Joe, we could have two.
Correct. Yeah. So we'll hold off to see what goes on with you, Joel, and then we do have another candidate that we'd like to speak to in terms of adding that person to the executive committee. But we just wanted to make sure it was Representative Hayward, and we wanted to make sure he was going to still be appointed, I think, was the part of it, right?
Yeah. We got confirmation earlier this week from her office that Kaylin is going to continue in the position.
Great. So we'll reach out to him. I want to get feedback from the other members of the committee to make sure that would be a good logical choice for us to have him on.
Governance.
Grady or Latanya or Joel.
I think it's an excellent idea. I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Yep, likewise.
Great. All right, then we'll reach out.
I would note, Jim, that Marty excitedly looked at me and, said he may have another, or there may be another appointment to the governance committee. But even if I'm not here, having my locally elected state representative and state senator continue to serve on the governance committee is something that, as their constituent, I would certainly welcome.
Great. All right, that's good to know and good to hear. Obviously, we want to have full support of that. Anything else? Kirk, anything else for us?
Not for me.
All right. Another question for Kirk? No. All right. One point here is personnel discussion as the annual review and compensation discussion. So the committee may convene in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute S 1985-1C to consider the employment, compensation, or performance evaluation of certain WCD employees over which the WCD board has the jurisdiction or exercises the responsibility. The committee is expected to reconvene in open session following this agenda item. I would seek a motion to move to closed session.
I'll move.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Great. All in favor to move to closed session, say aye.
Aye.
All right. With that, we will wait a moment. And Kirk, can you kind of man the ship over there while I'm a little bit under the weather? Yep. I will be on, but I don't know if we're going to have, we'll have everybody on the
Yes. Jim, you're live again.
All right. At this point, I think the only other things that we have on the agenda are future committee meeting dates, which, what is the next one, Michael? I think he says March 10th. Is that right?
Correct.
So that's the next time this committee meets. We also have obviously the board meeting on Friday. Any other changes? We'll kind of stick to the calendar as best we can, which I think we've done a good job of. Any other comments on that? Please send a note. Future committee meeting discussion items. If you have anything, voice it now or send an email on things you'd like to talk about in this committee or in the full board meeting, and we'll make sure we include it on the agenda.
All right.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you.
Thank you. I would move for a motion to adjourn.
I'll move it.
Great. Ask.
Second.
Second. All in favor of a motion to adjourn, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody. And we will be in touch and see you next Friday.
Feel better,
All right.
Jim.
Feel better, Jim.
Thank you.